Hello everyone. Now, in this video I'm going to be talking about the GoPro and how to use your GoPro doing any water sports, but mostly kitesurfing, as that is my forte. I'm going to talk about what settings I use, what mounts I use, how to get the most out of it, how to not let it ruin your session. Photo, video, you name it, it's all coming right up here. Now, this little device here has got me more likes, views, comments, viral videos than any professional production that I've ever done. Most of the time I use point of view, which is a mouth mount, head mount, chest mount. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the most important accessory that you can own with the GoPro, especially if you're doing water sports. This. You need to buy a Floaty Backdoor. Now, if you're using a GoPro in water, I've lost a couple and it's devastating. You lose all your footage from that day, plus you lose your GoPro. So, make sure you use a Floaty Backdoor. Never take any chances. Always use a Floaty Backdoor. I've even lost one with a Floaty Backdoor in the waves. So, you can also use like a leash and tie that to, but I think the leash gets a little bit in the way. I've experimented with it and quite often it'll be in the shot and stuff like that. So, I'd rather take a little bit of a risk to get a better shot without a leash, and sometimes the leash sort of like restricts your movement a little bit. Next up, when to use your GoPro. What kind of session are you going to use it? Well, the GoPro is widely known as not being the best in low light, so I would definitely choose sessions where the sun's going to be out or it's not going to be really dark, because that is the one downfall of the GoPro. The batteries aren't that good. They're only small, there's not much space, it's a small camera. So what I would do is always have it on charge at the point until you go on the water. Even in your van, car, have a USB lead, make sure it's at 100%. Don't charge it like a week before and you think in your head, oh, it's fully charged, it's ready to go. You go to the beach a week later and it's flat or it's got very little battery. So try and keep it charged right up until the last minute. When you first get your GoPro, you're really excited about it and you want to just commit a whole session to it. This thing will let you down time and time again. It's so frustrating. I call it the GoPro gamble, because it's a gamble every time you take it on the water. There's a chance that it's going to steam up, there's a chance that it's going to freeze, there's a chance that the battery's going to run out like immediately. So you've got to really accept that it may not work. And also, even if it does work, then there's a really good chance that there's going to be a water drop on your best shot of the day. Normally, the time when you don't have it is when something cool happens. Put it in your wetsuit almost every session. If the light pops out, there's a rainbow, whip it out, take a few shots for 10 minutes, put it away, forget about it, chances are there'll be good shots. How do I use the GoPro? 90% of my sessions, I just take the GoPro as is. No fancy mounts, no line mount, just this. It's very small, it fits in my wetsuit and doesn't really bother me too much. And I also use the float as a mouth mount, and you bite it like this. I find it the best way. It is the most natural point of view. I have this. This is an actual mouth mount. This is the best one I've come across, by the way. I'm not actually sure what brand it is because it's rubbed off, but it looks like this. If you do see it online, it's a little bit easier to breathe. The only thing is it kind of sits under your chin like this, and occasionally it kind of gets a bit too much of my wetsuit, like if I'm looking down, whereas if it's in my mouth it's kind of way more like what I'm seeing. And obviously you can't have it above because then it blocks your view. The other mount that I do occasionally take on the water with me is a handle that I put the GoPro on, and if I'm filming my buddies, sometimes at events and stuff, we film each other, we do follow cam, and it's easier to get a smoother, stable shot holding underneath. Also the cable I use this too. Again, the GoPro just fits right on there. The main disadvantage with this is the size. You know, you're committing your whole session to having this thing with you, which can be really annoying if you just don't want to have the GoPro anymore and you've got nowhere to put it on the beach. The other thing that I use is this little thing. Again, just really simple. I don't like all the flashy mounts. I've got suction cups and all that, but I just find them too much faff, you know. I'll use this little tripod here to do time lapses or video shots where I don't want to hold it when I'm setting up my kite. I'll put the GoPro on time lapse mode maybe every second and just set it up, leave it, and then create a time lapse after it. So this is pretty little handy lifestyle mount. The other accessory that I do occasionally use is the line mount. And this goes in your lines. You take these little green things out like this and you thread your line through and put the green things in afterwards. to be honest, I don't really use it that much. Occasionally I will use it to get a few extra shots, but I find it just way too much faff. Like, you can lose these green things really easily. It's really easy to get your lines tangled up in it if you ever do any rotations. I've had lines get wrapped around it. The footage I see most of the time of other people on social media is it's very shaky. It makes me feel a bit nauseous watching other people's footage. So again, I don't use it that much, but it does give quite a cool, unique perspective. Yeah, worth having a play with, but again, don't use it too much because there's a good chance that it will ruin your session. One of the most frustrating things is you get this insane shot, framed perfectly, rainbow sky, everything, and there's a water drop on the camera. And that is extremely frustrating, and it happens so much. You only get to see my perfectly clear clips, but there is a lot more of clips with spots on. So there's a couple of ways to avoid having spots. You can buy this thing called Rain-X. The water just flies straight off, and that works really effectively on a GoPro. You can get it in like a hardware store. It's called Rain-X. You just put a drop on there, use like a cloth, wipe it on there, and let it dry. That's the most important thing. When you're out on the water with Rain-X, all you do is you dip it in the water and then you blow on the lens. You go, and you just see the water disperse off the lens. Rain-X is great, but also, again, I've had sessions where Rain-X hasn't worked that well. My best piece of advice that I can give to you for keeping the lens free from water drops is just good old-fashioned saliva. Yeah, you heard it. What I do is between every shot, before every shot, I lick it. Real, like the gobbier the better, you know, get a load of saliva, just get it all over it, and then dip it in the water right before, stick it in your gob, do your trick, land. There's a good chance that it will stay perfectly clear. Occasionally it won't work, but I found it by far the best thing, better than Rain-X, because Rain-X also, it will eventually rub off after a couple of sessions, so you have to keep applying Rain-X, whereas you can just keep spitting and licking all the time. Spit, lick, dunk, go. Next up. What settings do I use? Well, let's start for video, since I probably use that the most. GoPro has several settings. This is the GoPro 7, the new one, which is full of pretty high spec. It does 4K, 240 frames a second. Now, over the last couple of years, GoPro have made the biggest improvements to the image stabilization. The qualities kind of remain the same. They've been doing 4K for a couple of years. The frame rate's increased. This does 120 and 240 frames a second, which is really cool. I'm going to just jump right in and say my go-to settings. My favorite settings that I use is 1080 at 120 frames a second. Most of the time I don't need 4K footage. There is the rare occasion where I'll use 4K or 2.7K if I'm doing something very spectacular, like snorkeling in the Silver in Iceland, like I did it in 4K then. The other reason why I use 1080 120 frames is because you're able to use Super View. Now the GoPro has, I think, 3 different settings. It has medium, wide and Super View. All it is a digital crop. So the GoPro just digitally crops the image in how you like it, and for point of view shots, which are my favourite shots to do with the GoPro, Super View is by far the best. Wide just doesn't quite get wide enough. It doesn't quite see what your eyes can see, and that's what I really like about Super View, is it sees everything that I see. And basically the difference between wide and Super View is probably Super View is about 10% wider each side. It just gives you that little extra bit more, gives it that fisheye look that really helps you see what I'm doing. So Super View 1080 120. 120 frames gives you really good slow motion. You can slow it down by like 25% and have pretty much super slow motion. So when you see those clips of me like doing a kite loop and then half around, it just stops for a second. That's in 120 frames a second. You got that? Okay. Protune. Okay, Protune is an option that the GoPro has to further customize the settings. It's basically, you can control the ISO, the shutter speed, the white balance, all in the GoPro. Otherwise it does this automatically for you. Now, it does a pretty good job on automatic. You're only talking subtle nuances with Protune. Some of the best shots I've got when you just restrict the ISO on Protune to 100 and that's it. And leave it on auto white balance everything. It just stops it getting too blown out. The other really important setting in Protune is exposure compensation. If it's overexposed, you can never bring back those white pixels. So you want it to be slightly on the dark side, and then you can lighten it up in post when you're color grading your footage. So I put it on -0.5, which takes it a notch down. It makes it all a little bit darker, and it makes a big difference to get the crispy footage that isn't too blown out. Because if you're using it in waves, it's quite often be white. It'll be like a real, like, quite often you're shooting into the sun with your GoPro. So again, you can even go down to -1 if you're in somewhere really bright like the Caribbean or something. But most of the time, 0.5 works great. That's -0.5 exposure compensation, which you'll find in Protune. Let's talk photos. There's two main photo settings that I use to get the best photos. One is burst, and the other is time-lapse. So time-lapse takes a photo every half a second, 2 seconds, or 5 seconds. I'll lick it and dip it, fire off the time-lapse, and just move it around a little bit, do some selfies, do some mouth mounts, hold it up here, hold it behind you, hold it like next to the bar. Sometimes the weirdest shots are the coolest shots with the GoPro, so I just have some fun with it. The other setting I like to use is burst mode. It can do up to 30 pictures over 6 seconds, which is my favourite setting to use. I'll use this setting for doing carves, tricks, kite loops, because 6 seconds is generally enough to cover most things. 30 photos in 6 seconds is actually 5 photos every second. Another thing to think about on photo mode is it doesn't do super view on photo mode, which I find really frustrating. It only does wide, which means it's not going to be as wide, which is harder to get point of view shots. So if I've got it in my mouth, I really try and lean back, especially on kite loops and stuff, to get everything in the image. Please GoPro add that super view setting for photo, because I'd really like that. I think that's about it, really. If you do have any more questions, leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks a lot for watching. Again, if you liked it, hit subscribe, like, you know what to do. Big up, peace out.